Hello, YouTube. It's me, Novarius, and I am here with another Fantasy Thoughts video where we talk about all things fantasy. For now, for today's episode, we are going to do a plot, a pitch of a story, and then see what we can do with that later on. Now, for today, it's going to be a little bit more in depth than before. We're first going to see the background of the world because I do think it's important to know what's kind of on the in the background, and then we will go from there. So what it basically is, it's just like our history, like Earth history, but with magic in it. And these magic events have been like seen. It's just they haven't really influenced the history that much. A lot is still the same and is still happening in the same manners. The story itself will be in 1937, so right before the World War. But we'll get to that in a sec. First, let me just go over kind of what happened in the years before that, and just a little bit of the history of the world. So there are types of magic, and these types emerge at different time periods. Starting off, we oh yeah, I made this small note. Note: madness appears to be inevitable when using magic. The idea is that magic is not from this world, and humans aren't meant to have it necessarily. You doing small things doesn't necessarily make you mad, but continuously using magic and doing greater and greater things with it might just alter your brain a little bit. That's kind of the kind of magic we want to work with. It is very influential on the brain. Some people aren't meant to have it, and throughout the ages, it's also seen as something evil in many cases. We'll come back to that. A big thing is that the church actually fights this magic. We'll come back to that at the end of the background. So 420 BC, blood magic emerges. This is the first type of real magic that they find. And this is the sacrifice for reward. You kill something, you just have to have a certain ritual. Blood from the blood gods give you a reward, a blessing. It doesn't have to be for you personally. It can be good weather, right? More fertility for your people, stuff like that. But every time this happens, there is the spawn of the undying. Like that's kind of the after effects, and that emerges vampires, witches. There's a lot of madness that goes on. Some of these rewards get really crazy, where a lot of folk like emperors or empresses get really powerful and end up, just doing some maddening things and killing a lot of people. So eventually it's seen as something bad, should not be used. It is fought against throughout the ages. And we are not saying that vampires and witches are evil. We're saying that some are, and some aren't. It's really that simple. So next, 13 AD, like Roman Empire kind of thing. That's where they found arcane magic. That starts to emerge. This primal source of energy, which is unstable, and it's just you can see it as a type of fuel that helps you make things move, or helps you like energize, for instance, just a fire throughout some runes, that sort of thing. I'm not going to go into detail, but for the big things, it usually gets unstable. It kind of wants to always change or be its own thing. There are arcane spawned beings. I'm not sure about the name. We can change that at a later date, which are wisps, elementals, that sort of thing. There's many more. I just wrote some down, but there's probably more. Then 433 AD, alteration magic emerges. This alteration magic focuses a lot on the mutation of the body, that sort of thing, where it's like tentacles, like very Lovecraftian in many ways. If I have to put a word to it, then that spawned the creatures of the abyss: merfolk, leviathans, and werewolves. Now I said werewolves here, but you can more see it as were creatures, like many more than just werewolves. Like much like D&D has it, where it's like were rats, werewolves, were something. Yeah, so that's definitely a thing, and I found it most fitting, these werewolves, to place them with the alteration, because it's a lot of it comes down to mutating the body, changing a human body to get something more or something different, something more powerful. So that's sort of where this fits in. Then 937, plague magic emerges. This is kind of in this, not in our history, but in this history, that is about the time when the actual Black Plague or emerges. Like in this world, not in, this is not our world. This is their world. I just want to make that clear, because I'm pretty sure the plague is later on, like 1200s in our world, but in this world, it's around that time period. I just want to make that very clear. And from all those piles of corpses, they basically are a calling card for plague magic, and the plague, like god. They are parasitic in nature, can use corpses to fuel itself, and that spawned the plague creatures, flesh golems, broodlings, giant insects. What are flesh golems? Well, just imagine a pile of bodies like climbing on each other and then just melting into each other and then becoming one creature and moving around trying to infect everything. And broodlings are just a made-up word. They just, I haven't really thought of what I want them to look like, but I can imagine them being smaller creatures, like for instance, like maybe a hand with like a brain somewhere in there, and like eyes on the hand, and that hand like moves around, stuff like that, where it's like just pieces of limbs that got legs and kind of just emerge from whatever debt that it can find. And yeah, that's sort of, maybe it's some sort of parasite that climbs into those things and makes them move to get their food, stuff like that. So pretty creepy stuff. It's also a lot about just infection and disease. They don't want to kill everything necessarily. It's more that they want to farm. They want to farm humanity for their parts. Because like they can't live on their own. They have to have something to infect. They are parasitic. They need those corpses. They are not gonna kill everything outright. That would be wrong. A lot of cults emerge from that, but this is also seen as evil by the church, and it's tried to, like, it's fought against throughout the ages. And then finally, after much begging to their lord, in 1441, 1441 AD, holy magic emerges. Now, holy magic is the first type of magic that is seen by not just Christianity but all religions as a magic of good. Now, I just want to note that all religions are kind of on the same board, that holy magic is from their god, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that it is from their god. We never say that. But it does exist, and they believe it's theirs. And all the other religions that use theirs are actually just not aware that they are using theirs. That's kind of the base like thought process of that. So that's a big deal for the church. Like, they see this and they jump on it. They say, this magic, first magic that is actually pure. Of course, not quite. In this case, holy magic actually is another being. I don't want to say God, but that draws powers from the souls of the faithful, specifically faithful in it. Everything that believes in it will, after death, collect themselves toward it. It's not necessarily that it eats their soul. It's just that it accumulates it, that it comes with it, and it forms this being of light. And together they stand strong. So it keeps getting more and more powerful, and eventually it gives like this holy spawn is born, right? And that is basically blessed newborns. It's just humans that are blessed. And I'm thinking like an aura around them, like actually light coming from them. They can make it glow harder and lighter. Like it not only that, they have like these powers of smiting of vile creatures. And throughout this, I haven't mentioned this, all these types of magic are fighting each other, right? And this is right This is our background. Now, I know that was a lot to take in, but I want to add that because these things constantly come back throughout the story. We want to constantly see elements of these kinds of magic and how they influence the world. Um, I'm not going to mention them too much more in the actual story bit, but keep in mind that they do keep rotating through. So then the actual story starts. Daniel is the character, our main character, can't die. If he does, he wakes up the previous day. He remembers what happened, but no one else does. So in this case, I put no one else between quotes because that's not always true, and you will see that later on. What also is a thing is that it's much like Groundhog Day or Edge of Tomorrow. Those kind of story elements. Like it just keeps going back, and like he can change things and he can and do things, and he well let's not get ahead of ourselves. How does this start? Well, Daniel, just a German fella, probably is a German soldier. Haven't worked that out quite well enough, but hold on. Daniel fiance who he loves dearly, and he has been like keeping himself from going like sleeping together with Elizabeth, and they were both like virgin, and they're keeping themselves from marriage. That's what I wanted to say. They're in love together, and Daniel's fiancée Elizabeth is taken from him by high-ranking officials of the German army, who are in many ways like the German army as many like internal cults that like they know about, but they don't wanna tell anyone, especially not the church. They don't want them to find out. But yeah, uh, Daniel obviously goes after them, but it's too late. They manage to sacrifice her in the hopes of one of them gaining immortality. Like that's what he sees. He sees one of the men like with a knife through her like stomach, maybe like bloodying her, making sure that blood goes everywhere because this magic is vile. This magic is very vile indeed. Um, Unknowingly, Daniel is given this power instead. Now, why this is, we can explain later on through the story. I will tell you right now. It is because the texts were mistranslated. They thought it had to be a virgin woman that they had to sacrifice to gain this power, but it is a virgin love, or otherwise, your first love that is true. And this love was true. This connection is what gave Daniel the powers instead of the person doing the sacrificing, which they didn't know at the time. Like they were kind of at a time constraint. But yeah, unknowingly Daniel is given this power instead. In a blind rage, Daniel murders all the cult members. How he does this? He just really angry, really pissed, shoots the guys with the guns, right? Like grabs a knife, stabs the other ones. After some epic brawling, right? Then after a while, he holds his holds his wife for a while, because kills everyone, sees his wife, like tries to pick up what remains of her. All like he's bloodied, she's bloodied, blood everywhere. Like we wanna really portray this as a dark, bloody scene, and then he's found, he's captured, trialed, executed. He wakes up. That fiancée in hands. What does he do? Well, he's in shock. He doesn't know what's going on. He's found. Captured, trialed, executed. And this repeats. This continues on. It keeps going and going. Like he doesn't really fully understand what's going on yet. He doesn't quite remember that it already happened before. It only gets to him after like 10 iterations of him just going through this. He doesn't know. It's like a moment in time which is stuck, which continues to repeat itself over and over and over again until finally he understands. He needs to move on, leave his wife behind. And then he runs away. What else can he do? With many mistakes during this run. And that's what we mean by that is there is a lot of times where he gets betrayed. He goes to his family. He gets betrayed by his family. Maybe he even kills his family even before they can even betray him, because the moment he dies, he goes back in time. How far he goes back, we don't want to say it. I think I wrote the previous day earlier. That's not necessarily true. We can go further back. We don't want to put a limit on it right away. We can play with that later on. So, yeah, he makes many mistakes. He gets betrayed. He turns around wrong corner. Just that easy, and like stands in front of a freaking group of police officers, and they're like, "Hey, that's a guy. That's a guy. Capture him." And then like he tries to run away, but then gets captured and maybe dies again, and then goes back and keeps doing this. So it's not like a flawless escape. But of course, they like no one else knows this. Like he keeps making these weird choices that actually make him like do exactly what he needs to do, and he interacts with people, and they find it odd that he suddenly stops, goes around a corner to hide. A patrol comes by, and they're like, "How did you know?" And then like stuff like that continues to happen on. Eventually, he gets out of Germany, like starts to understand like something's happening with me, and then after years of solitude in England, remember this is 1937, the war breaks out. Like after years, right? So it's like 1940-ish. It's fine. It's a different time period. Things happen similarly, but not exactly, and that's important to note because we want to play with those time periods, and we don't want to be too like sticky about them. We don't want to be exactly the same. We want to be very similar in many ways, but not exactly. That gives us a lot of freedom and creativity. Okay, so at this point, I kind of was wondering, well, what happens next? So I wrote down some of the things that are a constant. Well, now he wants to find out what's going on, right? He also wants to find out if there's a way to save his beloved, specifically with the powers that he has gained. But remember that in this world, there are these blessed ones who at this point are its own order entirely, who are, I should also mention, fighting Germany. Because Germany has been kind of said like, oh, screw the blessed ones. They're not helping us out with the war. We're gonna dabble more into blood magic, arcane magic, plague magic, and alteration magic. Like they want those different types of magic because they actually do something for the war, which is on their doorstep. So at this point, like the holy orders are kind of all rallying against Germany. That said, they're also rallying against other countries who are thinking the same thing than the Germans. The Germans aren't necessarily evil for this. They are portrayed as evil, obviously, but that doesn't make them evil. There are other things, other actions that make them evil, but let's not go too political into that. For now, we just should know our pal Daniel is forced to hide from the fanatics and the blessed ones, who would see him as blood tainted, because they think that all other magics are evil, even though that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes some magic could just help out with the like the rainfall, right? Some magic will just make that happen, and we should note that they're not necessarily evil for that. There are some effects that take place, and it's not always only that which you get that happens, right? For instance, with blood magic, if you sacrifice something, a blood spawn happens, like the Undying, a vampire, or a witch somehow emerges. How? Details for later that we can work out and like make stories around themselves. But let's continue on. So we need to keep that in the back of our mind, how these magics kind of influence the world. Then Daniel is like, all right, I gotta go back. I gotta go back to Germany to complete my goals. He joins the Allied army. To do so, becomes good friends with his unit. So you can imagine, like, Daniel's not the Slayer of Doom, right? He's actually a person. He becomes friends with these people, and he starts to find limits to his curse or blessing, however you want to see it. Because he knows, like, I cannot die, but I don't want any of my friends to die. Like, these people I know, like, that guy's gonna walk on a landmine. I can stop that from happening, right? Well, in some cases, yes, but in some cases, no. He starts to understand that no matter how I change it, there are some people that I just cannot save, no matter how I try, unless I go way back. But maybe he's limited by that. Maybe he cannot go far enough back to save those people. Okay. I just wanted to clarify that thought process in my head. Um, so I wanna round this up. Um, Good friends with his start to find limits to his curse. Eventually, he finds his previous house, also the location of the blood cult. Right? He pushes on with his unit. They are still struggling to find out what happened. So they are the blood cult, right? They still don't know what happened to the ritual. Also doing other stuff, but they're still like working that whole thing out. Then Daniel shows up, talks to the cult leader. The cult leader realizes what's going on, does something to remember what happens after Daniel dies, because Daniel actually is killed by this cult leader who is hiding a knife or something, stabs Daniel in the throat, and then goes back to try and talk to the cult leader again. Realizes the cult leader knows this. He goes away, maybe takes some of his research and workers that he cares about with him, to escape, because they cannot fight. They cannot fight Daniel. They know this. They're smart enough to know this. So yeah, meaning he goes back, and then when he returns for more answers, the leader of the cult is gone. That's when Daniel understands the cult leader remembered. Like, the cult leader somehow did something to remember what is gonna happen. And that gives us a villain for the future. But to end out, we actually want to end in a lower tone where we have an open ending. I feel like that really fits with Daniel, because Daniel is kind of immortal now. Besides being unable to die, he's also ageless. That is part of the perk that comes with this ritual. Yay. You cannot die and you can't age to death. Great. So Daniel helps end the war. He's not the only source, and I should also note he doesn't want to be a war hero, so he's not gonna be the one who kills all of the enemy soldiers. He's just gonna do his job, try to stay low key, and try to just seem like he's just surviving. He's barely making it out. He actually does effort to barely survive things, right? He actually does this constantly. Make sure that he has all his limbs though at the end of the day, but keep that in mind. Eventually, he ends up back in England. You know, he's kind of tired. He's been going through a lot of time. Like, only like what 8 years progressed since what happened. But for him, it's like twice that or even more. Like, the amount of time that actually progressed is immense. And then finally, he ends up back in England, meets a woman he hasn't seen since before the war. Right? He was living in England, hiding from the Blessed Ones and the Order, but eventually he gets back, and he ends up in love, and that's where we cut that story and give it kind of an open ending, but also like close that arc just a little bit to get some satisfaction for the character. So yeah, that was kind of the pitch, quite of a massive pitch, in fact. But honestly, I liked it. There was a lot more interaction this time than the previous fancy thoughts video, which I do appreciate. If you would like to influence the stories that I pitch here, I would highly suggest that you come over to Twitch, and whenever I do a fantasy thoughts, just come on in and send me your thoughts. That's smooth. That's smooth. All right, I'm gonna go. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.